Why are you always alone? The little girl's soft voice broke the silence inside the mansion. Everyone froze. No one had ever dared to ask Murphy Moretti that question. Then the 3-year-old girl slowly reached out her tiny hand and gently touched the face of the man everyone feared. The most powerful men in the city trembled at his name. But this little girl looked at him and saw something nobody else had ever seen. Not a monster, not a mafia boss, just a lonely man. "You're not scary," she whispered. "You're just sad." For the first time in 2 years, Murphy Moretti didn't know how to respond. Because he was the man who once controlled an empire. The man who survived enemies, betrayal, and countless dangers. But after a devastating accident left him paralyzed, the feared mafia boss lost everything that mattered. His power, his freedom, and the people who once surrounded him. Until the maid's little daughter walked into his life and became the only person brave enough to see the broken man behind the legend. The mafia boss was paralyzed and alone until the maid's little daughter changed his life forever. Nobody wanted to take care of Murphy Moretti anymore. 2 years ago, that sentence would have sounded like the biggest joke in Chicago. Because back then, Murphy Moretti was not a man people abandoned. He was the man people feared. His name was enough to silence entire rooms. His orders could change the fate of businesses, families, and even powerful men who believed they were untouchable. People did not say his name casually. They whispered it. Murphy Moretti was the head of the Moretti family, the most powerful organization operating in the shadows of Chicago. He was ruthless, cold, impossible to manipulate. Everyone knew one thing about him. If Murphy Moretti wanted something, he got it. If someone betrayed him, they disappeared. He built his empire with patience, intelligence, and a terrifying ability to see through people. His enemies feared his anger. His allies feared disappointing him. And his opponents? They usually surrendered before facing him. For 15 years, Murphy Moretti stood at the top of a world where weakness meant death. Until one night changed everything. A rainy night. A night that destroyed the man everyone thought could never fall. The attack happened on a quiet road outside the city. Murphy had always been careful. He never traveled the same route twice. He never trusted strangers. He never allowed his guards to become careless. But betrayal does not come from strangers. It comes from people standing close enough to hurt you. That night, 3 black vehicles drove through the darkness. The rain poured heavily against the windows. The city lights disappeared behind them. Murphy sat in the back seat, reading documents under the dim light. His expression was calm. Nothing could make him nervous. Nothing could make him panic. At least, that was what everyone believed. Then the first bullet shattered the window. The sound came suddenly, violently. The driver lost control. The car crashed into the roadside barrier. Before anyone could react, gunfire surrounded them. His security team fought back. But the attackers knew exactly where to aim. They knew exactly how Murphy would move. They knew exactly how many guards he had. Someone had given them information. Someone inside his own circle. Murphy remembered the cold rain touching his face. He remembered trying to move, trying to reach his weapon, trying to survive. Then he felt nothing. The world went silent. When Murphy opened his eyes again, he was in a hospital. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Medicine, disinfectant, a place where people came to fight death. The second thing he noticed was the silence. Too much silence. He tried to move, but his body did not respond. At first, he thought he was still weak from surgery. He tried again. Nothing. His fingers moved. His arms moved. But his legs felt like they belonged to someone else. A doctor stood beside the bed. The man's expression told Mercy everything before he spoke. "Mr. Moretti." Murphy stared at him. "Tell me." The doctor hesitated. For the first time in his career, he looked afraid of a patient. "The damage to your spine was severe." Silence. Murphy waited. "The surgery saved your life." Another pause. "But your lower body suffered permanent damage." Murphy's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying?"
The doctor swallowed. "You may never walk again." Those 6 words changed everything. Not because Murphy Moretti feared losing his legs. He had faced death many times. He had looked at guns pointed at his head without blinking. But losing his ability to stand meant losing the one thing that had protected him his entire life. Control. For the first time, Murphy Moretti was trapped inside his own body. At first, everyone came. The hospital room was full every day. Business partners arrived with expensive gifts. Old friends arrived with worried expressions. Employees stood outside his door, promising loyalty. Everyone said the same things. "We are with you, boss. You will recover. Moretti family needs you." Murphy listened, but he believed none of it, because power attracts people, and weakness reveals them. 3 months after the accident, the visits became fewer. 6 months later, almost nobody came. The men who once waited hours outside his office now avoided his calls. The people who once feared losing his approval began discussing who would replace him. A man who controlled an empire had become a problem they wanted to solve. But the most painful betrayal came from the woman who promised she would never leave. Sophia, his fiancée. For years, she had stood beside him. She had held his hand during difficult negotiations. She had told him, "Murphy, I don't care how dangerous your world is. I only care about you." He believed her. Until the day she walked into his hospital room. She was wearing a beautiful dress. Her hair was perfectly styled. She looked like she was going somewhere important, not like someone visiting the man she claimed to love. Murphy looked at her. "You came." Sophia forced a smile. "Yes." He studied her face. Something was different. "What happened?" She looked away. "I think we need to talk." Murphy already knew. People only said those words when they were preparing to leave. "I can't do this anymore," Sophia whispered. The room became silent. Murphy stared at her. "Do what?" She looked at his wheelchair. That single glance told him everything. "I can't spend my life taking care of someone who will never be the same." For a moment, Murphy said nothing. Not because he was shocked, because he was disappointed. After everything, after all the promises, this was the truth. Sophia continued. I know this sounds cruel. It does. She lowered her eyes. I loved the man you were. Murphy's expression did not change. But I don't know how to love this version of you. Those words hurt more than any bullet. Because a bullet only destroyed his body. Her words destroyed his belief in people. Sophia left that day, and Murphy never saw her again. After that, Murphy changed. Before the accident, he was feared because he was powerful. After the accident, he became feared because nobody knew what he was thinking. He stopped attending meetings. He stopped socializing. He stopped trusting anyone. The Moretti mansion became his entire world. A massive house. Thousands of expensive decorations. Hundreds of rooms. And almost no warmth. The servants learned new rules. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not ask personal questions. Do not mention his legs. Do not show pity. Murphy hated pity more than anything. Because pity reminded him of what he lost. Every morning he woke up in the same room. Every night he went to sleep listening to the same silence. He had money, power, influence, everything people dreamed about. But he had nobody. Meanwhile, across the city, a woman named Allie Carter was fighting a completely different battle. She did not own companies. She did not have powerful connections. She did not have people protecting her. She was simply trying to survive. Allie was 28 years old, a widow, a mother, and the only person responsible for her 3-year-old daughter, Lily. After her husband passed away, life became harder every month. Rent, food, medical bills. Everything depended on her. She worked as a maid whenever she could find stable work. It was not the life she imagined. But every morning, when Lily hugged her and smiled, Allie reminded herself why she kept going. You are my little sunshine, she always told her daughter. And Lily always answered, Mommy, I protect you too. That morning, Allie received an unexpected phone call. Her babysitter sounded apologetic. Allie, I'm so sorry. My daughter is sick. I can't watch Lily today. Allie froze. Today was her first day working at the Moretti mansion. She could not be late. She could not cancel. She needed that job. Is there anyone else who can help? The babysitter asked. Allie looked around her small apartment. There was nobody. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she looked at Lily. The little girl was sitting on the floor, drawing pictures. Mommy? Allie smiled. Would you like to come to work with me today? Lily's eyes brightened. Really? Yes, but I have to be very good. Lily immediately nodded. I can be the best girl. Allie smiled. She had no idea that bringing her daughter to work that day would change the fate of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. The Moretti mansion was exactly what Allie expected. Huge, beautiful, cold. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the atmosphere. The servants walked quietly. Nobody laughed. Nobody talked. It felt less like a home, more like a palace where nobody was happy. The house manager looked at Lily. "Keep your daughter with you." Allie nodded quickly. "I will." She turned to Lily. "Remember what Mommy said?" The little girl nodded. "Don't run. Don't touch anything. Don't bother Mr. Moretti." Lily repeated seriously. "Don't bother the scary man." Allie almost laughed. Yes, but Lily did not know something. The scary man everyone feared was the loneliest person in the entire house. 20 minutes later, Allie realized Lily was gone. Her heart stopped. Lily? No answer. She searched the kitchen, the hallway, the garden. Nothing. Panic started rising inside her. Then she heard a small voice coming from Murphy Moretti's private office. A voice that should never have been there. "Are you sad?" Allie froze. She slowly opened the door, and what she saw made her forget how to breathe. Her 3-year-old daughter was standing in front of Murphy Moretti, the most dangerous man in Chicago, the man everyone feared, the man nobody dared to approach. And Lily was holding out a small, broken cookie. "Here," the little girl smiled. "You can have mine." Murphy looked down at her. His expression was cold. "Why?" Lily tilted her head. "Because you look lonely." For the first time in 2 years, Murphy Moretti had no answer. Murphy Moretti had spent 2 years watching people step away from him. Doctors avoided long conversations with him. Employees avoided eye contact. Friends suddenly became too busy. Even family members found excuses not to visit. Everyone treated him like something fragile, something broken, something that could no longer provide value. But that little girl, she looked at him like he was just a person. Not a mafia boss, not a man sitting in a wheelchair, not someone who had lost everything, just a lonely man. And Murphy Moretti did not know how to react. The room remained silent. Lily stood there, holding the small, broken cookie in her tiny hand. The cookie was not even whole. One side had already cracked. A few crumbs had fallen onto her sweater, but she held it carefully, as if it was something precious. Murphy looked at the cookie. Then he looked at the child. "Do you know who I am?" Lily blinked. She looked around the room, at the expensive furniture, at the serious guards standing outside the door. Then she looked back at him. No. For some reason, that answer surprised him. Most people knew exactly who he was. They knew his reputation. They knew his power. They knew the stories. But this little girl knew nothing. She did not know that men twice her size lowered their heads when he entered a room. She did not know that people disappeared when they crossed him. She did not know that his name carried fear throughout the city. She only saw a man sitting alone. "You're Mr. Murphy," Lily said. Murphy raised an eyebrow. "That's all?" The little girl nodded. "My mommy says names are important." She paused. "Bad people can have good names." Murphy stared at her. For a 3-year-old child, That was an unusually thoughtful answer. Then Lily smiled. And good people can have sad faces. For the first time in months, Murphy had no cold response. No sharp remark. No warning. Nothing. At that exact moment, the door opened. Lily. Allie Carter rushed inside. Her face turned pale when she saw the scene. Her daughter was standing directly in front of Murphy Moretti, the most dangerous man in Chicago, the man nobody was allowed to disturb. "Mr. Moretti, I'm so sorry." Allie quickly walked forward. "I told her not to run around. I didn't know she came here." She immediately reached for Lily's hand. "Come on, we're leaving." But before she could take her daughter away, Murphy spoke. "Wait." Allie froze. Her heart started beating faster. She slowly turned around. Murphy looked at Lily. Not angrily, not coldly, just curious. "She wasn't bothering me." Allie looked shocked, because everyone in the mansion knew one rule: never enter Murphy Moretti's private office. Never interrupt him. Never make noise around him. Yet, her daughter had broken every rule. And somehow, he was not angry. "I apologize," Allie said again. Murphy looked at her. "You apologize too much?" The words surprised her. She did not know what to say. Most people apologized because they were afraid of him. But Allie apologized because she was responsible. There was a difference. "She is my daughter," Allie explained quietly. "I should make sure she doesn't cause problems." Murphy looked at Lily. The little girl was still holding the cookie. "She didn't cause a problem." Then he pointed at the cookie. "What is that?" Lily immediately answered. "A cookie. I can see that." Murphy's voice was slightly softer. "Why is it broken?" Lily looked down. "Oh." She looked embarrassed. "Because I dropped it." Murphy almost looked amused. "Almost. But you still gave it to me." Lily nodded. "Because I wanted you to have something." "Why?" The little girl thought carefully. Then she answered, "Because everyone has something." Murphy frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Lily looked at his empty desk, then at his empty room, then at him. "You have everything." She pointed around. "This house, these things, lots of people." Then she lowered her voice. "But you don't have anyone." The room became completely silent. Even the guards outside stopped moving, because nobody had ever spoken to Murphy Moretti like that. Nobody had ever looked past his money, past his power, past his reputation. But a 3-year-old child had somehow seen the one thing he tried hardest to hide: his loneliness. That night, something strange happened in the Moretti mansion. Murphy asked for dinner. The servants almost dropped the plates. Because for weeks, Murphy had barely touched his food. He ate only enough to survive. Not because he had no appetite, because he had no reason to care. But that night, he sat at the dining table, and beside his plate was a small drawing, a piece of paper with colorful marks made by a child. A house, a sun, 3 people holding hands. The housekeeper looked at it carefully. "Sir, should I remove that?" Murphy looked up. "No." The housekeeper was surprised. "Leave it." That was the first time anyone remembered seeing something personal in his dining room. The next morning, Allie expected the worst. She was certain she would be fired. She had allowed her daughter to enter a forbidden area. She had embarrassed herself. She prepared an apology before arriving. But when she entered the mansion, the house manager stalked her. "Mr. Moretti wants to see you." Allie's heart sank. She followed him upstairs. When she entered the office, Murphy was sitting near the window. Lily was sitting on the carpet, drawing, as if she belonged there. Allie looked confused. "Mr. Moretti?" Murphy looked at her. "Your daughter can stay here while you work." Allie froze. "What?" "She will not disturb anyone." Allie quickly shook her head. "That's too much trouble." It wasn't a question. His voice was firm. The old Murphy Moretti appeared for a moment. The man who gave orders. The man people obeyed. But then Lily looked up. "Mommy, Mr. Murphy likes my drawings." The cold expression on Murphy's face disappeared slightly. Allie noticed. And that shocked her more than anything, because she had heard stories about him. Everyone had. They said he had no emotions. They said he was impossible to please. They said nothing could soften him. But her daughter had been here for one day, and somehow she had already changed something. Over the next few weeks, the impossible happened. Lily became a regular visitor in Murphy's office. Every morning, she came with a new drawing. Sometimes it was a picture of flowers, sometimes animals, sometimes a strange-looking person she called Mr. Murphy. The drawing always showed him smiling, even though he rarely did. "Why do you always draw me smiling?" Murphy asked one day. Lily looked confused. "Because you should smile." "I don't smile." "Yes, you do." Murphy shook his head. "No." Lily pointed at him seriously. "You smiled yesterday." "When?" "When I dropped my juice." Murphy remembered. She had accidentally spilled juice on the expensive carpet. The servants had panicked. But Lily had looked terrified. Then she had whispered, "Sorry." And somehow, he had laughed. A real laugh. After 2 years. A sound he almost forgot existed. The servants began noticing changes. Murphy started attending meetings again. Not many, but enough. He started doing physical therapy regularly. He started eating full meals. And most importantly, he stopped looking like a man waiting for the end. Nobody understood why, except Lily. To her, it was simple. Mr. Murphy was lonely, and lonely people needed someone. But while the mansion slowly became warmer, someone else was watching. From across the city, a man stood inside a dark office. He looked at the photos placed on the table. Photos of Murphy. Photos of Allie. Photos of Lily. His expression became colder, because he understood something before anyone else did. Murphy Moretti was changing, and that was dangerous. A broken man was easy to control, but a man who had found something worth protecting, that man became unpredictable. The man picked up the phone. "Find out everything about the woman and the child." A pause. Then he added, "And if they become a weakness," his voice turned colder, "remove them." Murphy Moretti believed the biggest battle of his life was surviving the assassination. He was wrong. The real battle was just beginning. Because the moment he allowed himself to care again, someone decided to take that away from him. For 2 years, Murphy Moretti believed he had lost everything: his ability to walk, his trust in people, his faith in love. He thought the world had already shown him the worst kind of betrayal. But Allie was different. She never asked him for anything, not once. When Murphy offered to increase her salary, after discovering her difficult situation, she refused. When he offered to arrange better living conditions for her and Lily, she refused. When he told her she could take whatever help she needed from the Moretti family, she simply shook her head. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Moretti." Murphy looked at her. "But," Allie lowered her eyes, "but I don't want people helping me because they feel sorry for me." Those words stayed in his mind because nobody had ever said that to him before. Everyone around Murphy either feared him or wanted something from him. But Allie Carter, she wanted nothing, and that made him curious. One afternoon, Murphy watched Allie cleaning the library. She moved quietly, carefully, like she was trying not to disturb the house itself. Most servants avoided being near him. They would rush away whenever he entered a room. But Allie never changed her behavior. She greeted him politely. She asked if he needed anything. And then she continued working. No fear. No exaggeration. No fake kindness. Just normal. Murphy found that strange. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" The question came suddenly. Allie stopped cleaning. She turned around. "Should I be?" Murphy looked at her. Most people would immediately say no. They would try to please him. But Allie thought for a moment. Then she answered honestly, "I think people should be careful around anyone with power." Murphy's eyes narrowed slightly. But being careful is different from being afraid." The room became quiet. Allie continued, "I don't know the person everyone talks about." She looked at him. "I only know the person sitting in front of me." For some reason, Murphy looked away, because that answer touched something he did not want to admit. Allie Carter was not blind to who Murphy Moretti was. She had heard the rumors. Everyone in Chicago had. People said he was dangerous. People said he was ruthless. People said he had destroyed anyone who stood against him. But Allie also knew something else. She knew what it looked like when someone was suffering, because she had experienced it herself. After her husband died, many people disappeared from her life. Friends stopped calling. Relatives stopped visiting. People who once promised they would help suddenly became too busy. They did not hate her. They simply did not want to deal with her problems. That was something she understood. Loneliness. That was why she could see it in Murphy. Everyone saw a powerful man sitting in a wheelchair. But Allie saw something else. A person who had been abandoned. One evening, Murphy found Lily sitting beside his wheelchair. She was drawing something. "What are you making?" Lily looked up happily. "A picture." Murphy looked at the paper. It was a family, a woman, a little girl, and a man sitting in a wheelchair. He recognized himself. "You drew me." Lily nodded. "Yes." "Why?" The little girl looked confused. Because you're part of the picture. Murphy froze. Part of what? The family. The word hit him harder than he expected. Family. Something he had not thought about in years. His own family was built on power, on loyalty, on fear. But this child had drawn him into a family without asking anything, without knowing his past, without caring about his reputation, just because he was there. Lily, the little girl, looked up. What? You don't even know me. She smiled. Yes, I do. Murphy almost laughed. You've known me for a few weeks. That's enough. How? Lily held up her fingers. Because you like coffee. Murphy blinked. You noticed that? Yes. You know anything else? She thought seriously. You don't like loud people. A small pause. You pretend you're not sad. Murphy stopped moving. The little girl continued drawing. And you don't like being alone. For a moment, Murphy forgot how to breathe. Because she was right. That night, Murphy stayed awake longer than usual. He looked out the window of his bedroom. The city lights stretched into the distance. The same city he once controlled. The same city where people once feared his name. Yet somehow, a 3-year-old girl understood him better than anyone else. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was an old business contact. Before the accident, calls like this happened dozens of times every day. Now, they were rare. Murphy answered. What? The voice on the other side sounded nervous. Mr. Moretti, there are rumors spreading. About what? About your condition. Murphy's expression darkened. What rumors? That you're no longer capable of leading. Silence. The man continued carefully. Some people think the Moretti family needs a new leader. Murphy looked outside. Before, those words would have made him angry. But tonight, he felt something different. Calm. Because for the first time in 2 years, he had something beyond his empire. Something worth protecting. Let them think that. The man on the phone was shocked. Sir. Murphy's voice became cold. People reveal themselves when they think you are weak. He ended the call. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Lily entered his office carrying a small bag. Murphy looked at it. What is that? My important things. Murphy raised an eyebrow. You have important things? Lily nodded seriously. She opened the bag. Inside were a small stuffed rabbit, a few crayons, several drawings, and a tiny plastic bracelet. Murphy looked confused. Why are you showing me this? Lily walked closer. Then she placed the bracelet on his desk. This is for you. Murphy looked at it. Why? Because you need something happy. He stared at the small bracelet. It was probably worth less than one of his watches, less than one meal at his house. But somehow, he treated it like something valuable. Thank you. The words came naturally. Lily smiled. You're welcome. From that day forward, something changed inside Murphy. He still attended meetings. He still handled business. He was still Murphy Moretti. But the emptiness was gone, because every morning someone knocked on his office door, and before entering, a tiny voice would ask, "Mr. Murphy, can I come in?" And for the first time in years, Murphy looked forward to hearing someone enter. But while Murphy was slowly finding happiness again, someone else was preparing to destroy it. Inside, a dark office across the city, Marco Bellini watched security footage from the Moretti mansion. On the screen was Murphy, and beside him was Lily. Marco stared silently. He had served Murphy for 15 years. He knew every weakness, every habit, every secret. But this was something new. Murphy Moretti had never cared about anyone this much. That made the child dangerous, because people with nothing to lose were easy to control. But people with something to protect, they became unpredictable. Marco picked up his phone. "Continue monitoring them." A voice answered. "What about the woman?" Marco looked at Ali's picture. "The maid is not important." He paused. "But the child?" His eyes became cold. "She is the reason Murphy is changing." Marco ended the call. Murphy believed Ali and Lily had entered his life by accident. He believed they were simply a temporary comfort, a small moment of warmth in a dark period. He did not know the truth. They were not a distraction. They were the reason he would survive the storm coming toward him. Because soon, the people who wanted Murphy Moretti destroyed would discover something terrifying. The broken man they thought they had defeated was finally starting to fight again. For 15 years, Murphy Moretti believed there was one person in the world he could trust. One person who had stood beside him through every battle. One person who knew his secrets, his fears, and his weaknesses. That person was Marco Bellini. To everyone inside the Moretti organization, Marco was more than an advisor. He was family. He was the man who had saved Murphy's life more than once. The man who had followed him when others ran. The man who stood beside him when enemies surrounded them. At least, that was the story everyone believed, including Murphy. Before the accident, Murphy and Marco were unstoppable. They were two sides of the same weapon. Murphy made the decisions. Marco made them happen. When Murphy wanted to expand the Moretti empire, Marco handled negotiations. When Murphy needed information, Marco found it. When enemies tried to attack, Marco was always the first person standing beside him. People often said, "Murphy Moretti trusts nobody." But there was one exception. Marco Bellini. The only man who could walk into Murphy's office without permission. The only man who could disagree with him and walk away alive. The only man Murphy considered a brother. That was why the betrayal would hurt more than anything else. Because enemies can hurt your body, but family can destroy your soul. After Murphy's accident, Marco was one of the few people who remained. At least, that was what Murphy thought. When everyone else slowly disappeared, Marco continued visiting. He came to the hospital. He attended meetings on Murphy's behalf. He updated him about the family business. He told him, "Boss, don't worry. I'm here. The Moretti family is still yours. You will come back." Those words meant everything to Murphy. because at the time, he had lost almost everything. His legs, his confidence, his fiancée, his belief in people. But Marco stayed, or so it seemed. Months later, when Murphy moved back to the Moretti mansion, Marco continued acting like the loyal friend everyone expected. He attended meetings. He handled problems. He protected the organization. But something had changed. Murphy noticed it. Small things, tiny details most people would ignore. Marco no longer asked about Murphy's recovery. He no longer encouraged him to continue therapy. He no longer talked about the future. Instead, he started talking about reality. Maybe you should reduce your workload. Maybe someone else should handle more responsibilities. Maybe the family needs a different structure. At first, Murphy ignored it, because he trusted Marco. But trust does not mean blindness. A person can hide their true intentions for a long time. But eventually, they make mistakes. One evening, Marco entered Murphy's office. Murphy was reviewing documents. Lily's drawings covered one corner of his desk, a small reminder that his life had changed. Marco noticed them immediately. His expression changed for half a second. Not enough for most people to see. But Murphy saw it. You don't like them. Marco looked confused. What? The drawings? Marco forced a smile. No, of course not. Murphy looked back at the documents. You hesitated. Marco laughed lightly. I'm just surprised. By what? That someone like you would allow a child to change your routine. Silence. Murphy lifted his eyes. Someone like me? Marco realized his mistake. He quickly corrected himself. I mean, someone in your position. Murphy studied him. What position? Marco sighed. You know what I mean. No. Murphy's voice became colder. Say it. The room became tense. Marco looked away. You are not the same man you were before. There it was. The sentence Murphy had heard from everyone. The sentence everyone was too afraid to say directly. But coming from Marco, it felt different. Because Marco was supposed to believe otherwise. Murphy stared at him. And what exactly am I now? Marco hesitated. A man who needs protection. A long silence followed. Then Murphy smiled slightly. Not because he was amused, because he understood something. People who truly cared about him wanted him to recover. People who wanted control wanted him to accept weakness. That night, Murphy could not sleep. He sat alone in his office. The city lights reflected against the glass windows. 2 years ago, he would have immediately confronted Marco. He would have demanded answers. But now, he waited. Because experience had taught him something. A person's true intentions were revealed when they believed they were winning. And if Marco was hiding something, Murphy would find it. Meanwhile, across the city, Marco sat in a private room with several powerful men. Men who once feared Murphy. Men who were tired of waiting. One of them placed a glass on the table. You said he would never recover. Marco remained silent. He lost his legs. He lost his woman. He lost his influence.
The man smiled. So why is he still standing? Marco looked at him coldly. Because he hasn't realized he already lost. The men exchanged looks. Marco continued. Murphy Moretti is dangerous because he thinks he has nothing to lose. The man frowned. But he does.
Marco looked at the photo on the table. The photo showed Lily, the little girl entering Murphy's office. The little girl sitting beside him. The little girl who had somehow changed him. He has a weakness now. The room became quiet. Marco tapped the photo. Her. Marco had studied Murphy for 15 years. He knew exactly how Murphy operated. Murphy was not afraid of death. He was not afraid of pain. He was not afraid of enemies. But there was one thing Murphy could never handle: losing someone he cared about. Before the accident, Murphy avoided emotional attachments. Because attachments created weakness. That was why Marco never expected this. He never expected Murphy to open his heart again. Especially not to a child. Especially not to a maid's daughter. But that was exactly why Lily was dangerous. She gave Murphy something Marco had spent 2 years trying to destroy: hope. The next morning, Murphy surprised everyone. He asked for a full business report. Not a summary. Not information filtered through others. Everything. Every account. Every territory. Every recent change. The executives were shocked. "Sir, you should rest." Murphy looked at them. "I have rested enough." His voice was calm. But while I was resting, he looked around the room. Some people became comfortable. Nobody spoke. Because everyone understood. Murphy Moretti was returning. Not physically. Not yet. But mentally. The old Murphy was waking up. That afternoon, Lily entered his office carrying a small flower. Murphy looked at it. "What is that?" "A flower. I can see that." She walked closer. "It's for you." Murphy looked surprised. "Why?" "Because flowers need sunlight." She pointed toward the window. "And people need kindness." Murphy stared at her. "Who taught you that?" "My Mimey." A small smile appeared on his face. "Your mother is very wise." Lily nodded proudly. "Yes." Then she looked at him seriously. "Mr. Murphy." "Yes? Are you going to be happy again?" The question caught him off guard. Nobody asked him that. Not his doctors. Not his friends. Not his family. Only this child. Murphy looked at the flower in his hand. Then he answered honestly, "I don't know." Lily thought for a moment. Then she smiled. "You will." "Why?" "Because you have us." Those 3 words stayed with him. You have us. For years, Murph's believed power was the only thing that mattered. But now, a child was teaching him something different. That night, Murphy received an anonymous message. A photo. Nothing else. He opened it. His expression changed. Because the picture showed Marco entering a building with several men. Men who should not have been meeting with him. Murphy stared at the screen. His fingers tightened. For 2 years, he wondered who betrayed him. Now, he might finally have his answer. But the most painful part was not discovering an enemy. It was discovering that the enemy had been standing beside him the entire time. Murphy looked toward the small drawing Lily had left on his desk. 3 people. A mother, a child, a man in a wheelchair. A strange feeling appeared in his chest. Fear. Not for himself. For them. Because now he understood. Marco was not trying to take his empire.
He was trying to take away the only reason Ruse wanted to live again. And somewhere in the darkness, Marco Bellini was preparing his next move. He believed Murphy Moretti had become weak. He believed love had made him vulnerable. He believed the wheelchair had taken away the most dangerous man in Chicago. But Marco made one mistake. He underestimated what happened when a broken man finally found something worth protecting. Because Murphy Moretti was no longer fighting to protect an empire. He was fighting to protect his family. Murphy Moretti had spent his entire life learning one rule: never trust anyone completely. In his world, loyalty was often just a mask people wore until they found a better opportunity. He knew that. He understood that. Yet, somehow, he had made the one mistake he always warned others about. He trusted Marco Bellini, not because Marco was useful, not because Marco was powerful, but because Murphy had believed there was still one person in his life who cared about him as a man, not as a leader. Now, sitting alone in his office, staring at the photo that proved Marco had been hiding something, Murphy finally accepted the truth. The person who helped build his empire might also be the person trying to destroy it.
The next morning, Murphy changed. The servants noticed first. Before, Murphy would spend most of his day alone. He avoided conversations. He avoided meetings. He avoided anything that reminded him of the world he had lost. But that morning, he was already in his office before sunrise. Documents covered the entire desk. Financial reports, security records, communication logs. Every piece of information about the Moretti organization was placed in front of him. The house manager stood near the door, surprised. "Sir, should I call Mr. Bellini?" Murphy did not look up. "No." The house manager paused. "No?" "Not yet." There was something different in Murphy's voice. Not anger, not sadness, something colder. Control. The old Murphy Moretti was returning. For the next several hours, Murphy investigated everything. He started with the night of the attack, the night that changed his life. The official report said it was a random ambush, a mistake, an unfortunate event. But Murphy never believed in coincidences, especially not when the attackers knew every detail about his movements. The route, the security pattern, the number of guards, even the time he would leave the city. Someone had provided that information. Someone close. Murphy reviewed every name connected to the operation. Every employee. Every associate. Every person who had access to his schedule. Then he saw something. A small detail. Almost invisible. A security file had been accessed 3 days before the attack. The person who opened it had authorization. High-level authorization. Only a few people had that access. Murphy looked at the name. His expression became completely still. Marco Bellini. For a long time, Murphy simply stared at the screen. The room was silent. A normal person might have felt rage, betrayal, desire for revenge. But Murphy felt something much worse. Disappointment. Because anger was easy. Anger meant you still expected something from someone. But disappointment meant you finally understood. The person you believed in was never who you thought they were. That afternoon, Allie entered his office with Lily. She immediately noticed something. Murphy looked different. Not colder, not crueler, just more distant. Mr. Moretti? He looked up. Yes. Allie hesitated. Are you okay? Murphy almost laughed. Because for years, nobody asked him that question. Not honestly. People asked if he was okay because they wanted to know if the business was okay. But Allie asked because she cared. I'm fine. She knew he was lying, but she did not push. That was another thing Murphy noticed about her. She respected boundaries. She never forced him to speak. She simply stayed. And somehow, that was more comforting than any words. Lily walked toward his desk. She held something behind her back. What do you have? She smiled. A surprise. Murphy looked suspicious. What kind of surprise? The good kind. She pulled out a small paper crown. It was made from colored paper. The edges were uneven. The drawing was messy, but it was clearly made with effort. Murphy stared at it. What is this? A crown. For who? For you. Murphy raised an eyebrow. I don't need a crown. Lily shook her head. Yes, you do. Why? Because you're a king. Murphy almost smiled. I'm not a king. Lily looked around. This house is big. She pointed at the windows. Lots of people listen to you. Then she placed the crown on his desk. That means you're a king. Murphy looked at the small paper crown. A strange warmth appeared in his chest. A few months ago, he would have considered this meaningless. Now, he carefully picked it up. Thank you. Lily smiled. You're welcome. But happiness never lasted long in Murphy's world. That evening, his condition suddenly worsened. At first, he ignored it. A little dizziness, a little weakness, nothing unusual. After 2 years in a wheelchair, he had experienced many difficult days. But this felt different. His vision became blurry. His breathing became heavier. His hand tightened around the armrest. The glass of water beside him fell to the floor. The sound echoed through the room. A servant rushed inside. Mr. Moretti? Murphy tried to answer, but his body refused. Within seconds, the mansion was in chaos. The doctor arrived 20 minutes later. Everyone waited outside. Allie stood in the hallway, holding Lily's hand. The little girl looked worried. Mommy. Yes? Is Mr. Murphy going to be okay? Allie looked at the closed door. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to comfort her, but she knew fear too well. So instead, She squeezed Lily's hand. The doctors are helping him. Lily looked down. I don't like when people are hurt. Allie gently touched her hair. Me neither. Inside the room, the doctor examined Murphy carefully. After several tests, his expression changed. This is not normal. Murphy looked at him. What? The doctor checked the results again. The symptoms you're experiencing. He paused. They are not from your original injury. Murphy's eyes narrowed. Explain? The doctor looked serious. Someone has been affecting your body. Silence. What do you mean? The doctor lowered his voice. Your medication? Murphy stared at him. My medication? Yes. The doctor placed the report on the table. There are traces of substances that should not be there. Murphy's face became cold. Someone poisoned me? The doctor did not answer immediately, but his silence was enough. For years, Murphy had faced enemies with guns, with knives, with threats. But this was different. This person was not trying to kill him quickly. They were doing something much more calculated. They were weakening him slowly, making him look sick, making everyone believe he was naturally losing control, making his own body become evidence against him. Murphy understood immediately. This was not just an attack. It was a takeover. Someone wanted the world to believe Murphy Moretti was no longer capable. Someone wanted his empire. When Murphy returned home from the hospital, he said nothing. He did not accuse anyone. He did not confront Marco. Not yet, because now he knew something important. Marco believed Murphy was already defeated, and that was an advantage. People reveal their plans when they think they have already won. That night, Murphy sat in his office. The small paper crown Lily made was still on his desk. Next to it was the medical report. Poison. Betrayal. A hidden enemy. Two completely different worlds. But they were connected. Because if Murphy died, Lily and Allie would be left with no protection. And that thought terrified him more than death itself. The next morning, Murphy made a decision. He called his most trusted remaining security officer. From today onward, increase protection around the mansion. The man hesitated. Is there a threat? Murphy looked toward the hallway, where Lily's laughter could be heard. Yes. A pause. But not against me. His voice became quiet. Against what I care about. Across the city, Marco received the news. The plan failed. He looked up. What do you mean? The medication change was discovered. For several seconds, Marco said nothing. Then he smiled. Not with fear, with confidence. Interesting. The person on the phone asked, What do we do now? Marco looked at a photo of Murphy, then at a photo of Lily. Nothing. Nothing? Marco nodded. Let him know. Let him know what? That someone is coming for what he loves. Marco thought he understood Murphy Moretti. He thought the wheelchair had made him weaker. He thought love had made him vulnerable. But Marco had forgotten one important thing. A wounded animal was dangerous. But a wounded father? A man protecting the people who gave him a reason to live? That man was unstoppable. Murphy Moretti survived the accident. He survived losing his power. He survived losing the woman he loved. Now he had to survive the betrayal of the man he called his brother. And this time, he would not just fight to survive. He would fight back. Murphy Moretti had spent his entire life preparing for enemies. He knew how to deal with threats. He knew how to negotiate with dangerous people. He knew how to survive when someone pointed a weapon at him. But he never prepared for this. He never prepared for the moment when the person standing beside him would become the person trying to destroy him. Marco Bellini was not just an employee. He was the man Murphy trusted with his life. The man who knew where Murphy kept his secrets. The man who knew his fears. The man who knew exactly how to hurt him. And that was why Murphy understood something important. The most dangerous enemy was never the one standing in front of you. It was the one you invited into your home. After discovering the poison in his medication, Murphy did not confront Marco. Everyone expected him to. The old Murphy Moretti would have immediately found the person responsible. He would have demanded answers. He would have made an example out of whoever dared to betray him. But the old Murphy had changed. 2 years in a wheelchair had taught him patience. And losing almost everything had taught him the value of information. A man who attacks in anger reveals his weakness. A man who waits learns everything. So Murphy did something nobody expected. He acted like nothing happened. The next morning, Marco arrived at the mansion as usual. He walked through the entrance confidently. The servants greeted him respectfully. After all, for years, everyone believed Marco was the second most powerful person in the Moretti organization. He entered Murphy's office without knocking, just like always. "Good morning, boss." Murphy looked up from his documents. His expression was calm. "Good morning." Marco studied him carefully. Too carefully. "You look better." Murphy smiled slightly. "Do I?" "Yes." Marco walked closer. "I heard you had some health problems yesterday." "I did. Are you feeling better?" Murphy looked at him. "I'm recovering." Marco nodded. "That's good. A normal person would not notice anything strange." But Murphy noticed, because Marco's concern was perfect. Too perfect. The right words. The right expression. The right amount of worry. It looked like loyalty. But Murphy now knew something. Sometimes the best lies were not completely false. They were mixed with enough truth to become believable. During the meeting, Marco presented several reports. Business updates. Financial information. Territory changes. Everything looked normal. But Murphy noticed one thing. Marco kept trying to move the conversation away from certain areas. Especially security. Especially the investigation into the attack 2 years ago. That confirmed Murphy's suspicion. Marco was hiding something. But Murphy needed proof. Not emotion. Not assumptions. Proof. After the meeting ended, Murphy called his private investigator, a man named Daniel Hayes. Daniel had worked for Murphy before the accident. Unlike many others, he never switched sides, because Daniel understood something. Real loyalty was not about fear. It was about respect. "I need everything." Daniel looked serious. "About who?" Murphy paused. Then he answered, "Marco Bellini." Daniel's expression changed. "Are you sure?" Murphy looked at him. "I don't ask questions unless I already know the answer is dangerous." Daniel nodded. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." A pause. His money, his contacts, his meetings, and especially, Murphy's eyes turned cold. The people he met before my accident. Daniel understood. This was no longer an investigation. It was a war. Meanwhile, Allie noticed the change in Murphy. She noticed because she was one of the few people who actually paid attention. Everyone else saw his power. She saw his silence. That evening, she found him alone in the garden. The wheelchair was parked beside a small table. Murphy was staring at the city. Not angrily, just thinking. Mr. Moretti? He turned. Allie. She walked closer. You're worried. Murphy looked away. I'm always worried. No. She shook her head. Not like this. He said nothing. Allie stood beside him. You don't have to tell me. That surprised him. Most people demanded explanations. They wanted answers. But Allie simply stayed. After a moment, Murphy asked, Why do you do that? Do what? Stay. Allie looked confused. Because you need someone? Murphy smiled faintly. That's not a good reason. Why? Because needing someone makes you weak. Allie looked at him. No. Her answer was immediate. Needing someone means you're human. Murphy became quiet. For years, he had believed emotions were weaknesses. Love, trust, attachment. All things that could be used against him. But Allie saw it differently. Maybe those things were not weaknesses. Maybe they were the reason people fought. That night, Lily found Murphy sitting in his office. She climbed onto the small chair beside him. What are you doing? Working. Are you fixing something? Yes. What? Murphy looked at her. My mistakes. Lily thought carefully. Then she asked, Can mistakes be fixed? Murphy looked at the little girl. I don't know. She smiled. My mommy says people fix things when they care enough. Those words stayed with him because Murphy realized something. For years, he had been trying to rebuild his empire. But maybe before that, he needed to rebuild himself. 3 days later, Daniel returned. Murphy knew immediately. The moment Daniel entered the room, he saw the seriousness on his face. What did you find? Daniel placed a file on the desk. It's worse than we thought. Murphy opened it. Inside were photographs, documents, records, payments, everything. The truth was finally appearing. Marco had been meeting with a rival organization for almost 18 months. Not after the accident. Before it. Murphy's eyes narrowed. How long? Daniel answered quietly. Almost 2 years before the attack. Silence. 2 years. Marco had been planning this for years. The betrayal was not sudden. It was patient. Calculated. Cold. Murphy continued reading. Then he saw the final piece of evidence. A payment record. A large amount of money, transferred 3 days before the assassination attempt. The sender was hidden, but the receiver was clear. Marco Belli. For a moment, Murphy closed his eyes. He remembered everything. Marco standing beside him. Marco promising loyalty. Marco saying, I'm here. The memories felt different now, like scenes from a story where he had missed the obvious ending. The hardest part about betrayal was not discovering someone lied. It was realizing how many moments were fake. That evening, Murphy sat alone. The small paper crown Lily made was still on his desk. The flower she gave him was beside it. Two simple things, worth almost nothing financially, but more valuable than everything else in the room, because they represented something Marco never understood. Murphy had changed, not because he became weaker, because he finally found something stronger than power: love. The next day, Murphy called Marco. "Come to the office." Marco arrived quickly. He smiled. "Boss." Murphy looked at him. For 15 years, he had called this man brother. Now he looked at him like a stranger. "Marco." "Yes. Do you remember the night I was attacked?" A slight change appeared in Marco's eyes. Only for a second. But Murphy saw it. "I remember. Do you?" Marco frowned. "What does that mean?" Murphy smiled. "Nothing." A long silence. Then Murphy turned toward the window. "You've been loyal to me for a long time." Marco relaxed slightly. "Yes." 15 years. "Yes." Murphy nodded. "Sometimes." He paused. 15 years is enough time for someone to become family. Marco smiled. "Exactly." Murphy turned back. "And sometimes," his voice became colder, 15 years is enough time for someone to learn exactly how to destroy you." The smile disappeared from Marco's face. For the first time, he realized something. Murphy knew. The room became completely silent. Neither man spoke. Two people who once stood together were now standing on opposite sides. One had been waiting for the truth. The other had been waiting for the right moment to strike. Finally, Marco asked, "How much do you know?" Murphy looked at him. "Enough." Marco's expression changed. The mask was gone. The fake loyalty, the fake friendship, everything disappeared. And behind it was the enemy Murphy had been searching for. But Murphy did not attack. Not yet. Because there was still one thing he needed to know. Why? Why would the man closest to him betray him? Why would Marco destroy everything they built together? The answer would reveal something even more painful than the betrayal itself. Because the reason Marco turned against him was connected to the night Murphy lost everything. For 15 years, Murphy Moretti believed betrayal had a face. He believed it belonged to enemies who smiled while holding weapons behind their backs.
He believed it belonged to strangers who wanted his position. He believed it belonged to people who were afraid of his power but secretly wished to take it. He never imagined betrayal would come from the person standing closest to him. Marco Bellini, the man who knew his favorite drink, the man who knew his daily schedule, the man who knew every weakness Murphy had ever tried to hide, the man who once promised, "I will stand beside you until the end." Now, standing in Murphy's office, Marco looked like a completely different person. Not a brother, not a friend, an enemy. Murphy stared at him from his wheelchair. The room was silent. For years, Marco had been the one person Murphy trusted without question. But now every memory felt different. Every conversation, every promise, every moment they shared, everything had another meaning. "Why?" Murphy finally asked. His voice was calm, too calm. Marco looked at him. "You want to know why?" "Yes." A bitter smile appeared on Marco's face. "After everything, that is the only question you have?" Murphy said nothing. Marco walked slowly around the room. "You built an empire." He looked at the expensive furniture. "The whole city feared you.
He looked back at Murphy. You had everything. Murphy's expression did not change. Except, Marco laughed quietly. Except you never saw me. A pause. Not once. Murphy narrowed his eyes. That is your reason? Marco's expression hardened. No. He stepped closer. That is the beginning. For the first time, Murphy saw the anger hidden beneath Marco's loyalty. 15 years of anger. 15 years of resentment. You always called me your brother. Marco's voice became colder. But did you ever treat me like one? Murphy remained silent. Marco continued. I fought your battles. I cleaned up your problems. I protected your empire. I destroyed enemies for you. His voice rose. And what did I get? Murphy looked at him. You had everything you asked for. Marco laughed. Exactly. A strange sadness appeared on his face. I had everything I asked for, but never anything I wanted. Marco turned away. When people looked at me, they saw Murphy Moretti's assistant. They never saw Marco Bellini. They saw the man standing behind the throne. His hands tightened. I spent 15 years building your kingdom, and everyone called you a genius. Murphy finally understood. This was not just greed. It was jealousy, a slow poison that had been growing for years. You wanted my position? Marco looked back. Yes. The answer was immediate. I wanted what should have been mine. The room became colder. Murphy looked at him for a long time. Then he said, You were never my brother. Marco froze. Those words hurt more than he expected, because they came from Murphy, the one person whose respect he wanted. Before Marco could answer, the office door opened. A small voice interrupted them. Mr. Murphy? Both Vind are moved. Look at the gas can. Mr. Murphy? Both men turned. Lily stood at the entrance, holding her stuffed rabbit. Her innocent eyes looked between them. The tension in the room disappeared for a moment. Murphy's expression softened immediately. Lily. She walked inside. Are you busy? Murphy looked at Marco, then back at her. No. Lily smiled. She walked toward him, but Marco watched her carefully, and Murphy noticed. That look, that cold calculation, the same look from the photographs. Something inside Murphy warned him. Marco was not just angry. He was planning something. That night, Murphy made a decision. He would not destroy Marco immediately. Not yet, because he needed to protect Allie and Lily first. He increased security around the mansion. He changed access permissions. He secretly moved important documents. But he did not tell Allie the truth. Not because he did not trust her, because he wanted to keep her away from his dangerous world. Unfortunately, Marco already knew exactly where Murphy's heart was. 3 days later, everything changed. It happened in the afternoon. The mansion was unusually quiet. Allie was preparing dinner. Lily was in the garden. Murphy was in his office reviewing documents. Then his security alarm activated. A sharp sound. A sound he had not heard in years. Immediately, Every guard moved. Murphy grabbed the armrests of his wheelchair. What happened? The security officer looked terrified. Sir. A pause. Lily is missing. The world stopped. For a moment, Murphy heard nothing. Not the alarms, not the voices, not the footsteps. Only one sentence repeated in his mind. Lily is missing. Murphy moved faster than anyone expected. Lock down the property. Yes, sir. Check every camera. Yes, sir. Find Allie. The guard hesitated. She is missing, too. That was when Murphy knew. This was not a random attack. This was planned. Someone did not come for money. Someone came for the people he loved. The security footage showed only one thing: a black vehicle leaving the property. The driver was hidden, but Murphy recognized the method. Professional, clean, careful, just like Marco. His hands tightened. For the first time in years, Murphy Moretti looked afraid. Not for himself. Never for himself. For them. Meanwhile, in an abandoned building outside the city, Allie woke up. Her head hurt. She tried to move. Then she heard a small voice. Mommy? Her heart broke. Lily? The little girl was sitting nearby. She was scared, but she was not injured. Allie immediately moved toward her. Are you okay? Lily nodded. I'm okay. Allie hugged her tightly. Then she looked around. They were alone, except for one person. Marco Bellini stood near the door. Allie recognized him. She had seen him at the mansion. Why are we here? Marco looked at her. You are the reason Murphy is weak. Allie frowned. No. Her answer was quiet but firm. He is stronger because he cares. Marco smiled coldly. You believe that? Yes. Allie looked directly at him. Because I have seen him change. For some reason, those words angered Marco. Change. He stepped closer. You think you know him? No. Allie shook her head. I don't know everything about him. She looked at Lily. But I know he is not the monster everyone says he is. Marco laughed. That is exactly why you are dangerous. Back at the mansion, Murphy received the message. A video. Nothing else. He opened it and saw Lily sitting beside Allie. Safe, but frightened. Then Marco appeared on the screen. Hello, Murphy. Murphy's face became cold. Where are they? Marco smiled. There he is, the old Murphy. Murphy ignored the comment. Where are they? Marco leaned closer to the camera. You know what I find interesting? You spent your whole life believing emotions made people woke. But the moment you found something to love, you became exactly what I wanted. Murphy's eyes darkened. What do you want? Marco smiled. The Moretti Empire. A pause. And your resignation. Murphy looked at the screen. You think taking my company will make you me? Marco's expression changed. You still don't understand. No, I don't want to be you. I want the world to finally see me. The call ended. The room was silent. Everyone waited for Murphy's order. What thing we each to do? Whether which should lived? What everyone expected islands.
Everyone expected the old Murphy Moretti to return, the man who destroyed anyone who challenged him. But Murphy remained completely silent. That silence scared them more than anger, because everyone who knew Murphy understood one thing. When he was angry, he acted quickly. When he was calm, someone was about to suffer. The security officer stepped forward. "Sir, we can gather a team immediately." Murphy looked at him. "No?" The man was surprised. "No?" Murphy shook his head. "Marco wants me to rush." He looked at the video message again. "He wants me emotional." A pause. "He wants me to make mistakes." The officer understood. Murphy was not chasing revenge. He was planning a rescue. For the next hour, Murphy studied everything. The video, the background, the sound, the lighting, the smallest details. Everyone watched as he analyzed the situation. This was the same man who built an empire through strategy. The wheelchair had never taken away his mind. His body had changed, not his intelligence. "Find where this was recorded." One of the technicians nodded. "We are working on it." "How long?" "Maybe several hours." Murphy looked at him. "We don't have several hours." The technician immediately lowered his head. "I'll do it faster." Meanwhile, in the abandoned building, Marco was enjoying his victory. At least, he thought he was. He sat across from Allie and Lily. "You know what is funny?" Allie looked at him silently. "Everyone thinks Murphy Moretti is powerful because of money." Marco smiled. "They are wrong." He looked at Lily. "His real power was always fear." Allie frowned. "No." Marco looked at her. "No? No." Her voice remained calm. "People were afraid of him. But that doesn't mean fear was what made him strong." Marco laughed. "You really believe you understand him?" Allie looked at Lily. "I know one thing." "What?" "He changed." Marco's smile disappeared slightly. "He was cruel before. He was cold. But now—" She looked toward Lily. "He cares." Marco shook his head. "That is weakness." Allie answered immediately. "No." Her eyes became serious. "That is the first time he has been truly strong." Those words stayed with Marco. Because deep down, they scared him. Not because he believed them, because a part of him wondered if they were true. For 15 years, Marco had watched Murphy build power, but he had never seen Murphy happy. Never. Not once. Murphy had everything: money, respect, fear, control, yet he was always alone. Then a child appeared, and somehow the impossible happened. Murphy Moretti started becoming human again, and Marco hated that, because it proved something painful. The thing Murphy had that Marco wanted was not power. It was something Marco could never steal: love. Finally, Murphy's team found the location.
An old warehouse outside the city, the same place where Marco had secretly met his allies. Murphy looked at the map. Prepare the vehicles. The security officer hesitated. Sir, what? Your condition. Murphy looked at him. The officer stopped immediately because he realized his mistake. Murphy was still a Murphy Moretti. The wheelchair changed how he moved, not who he was. I don't need to walk into that building to win, Murphy said quietly. I only need to make sure I leave with my family. Before leaving, Murphy stopped by his office. He looked around. The room had changed. Before Lily arrived, this place was empty, cold, silent. Now there were drawings everywhere. A flower, a house, a strange picture of Murphy wearing a paper crown. He picked up the small crown. For a moment he remembered Lily's voice. You're a king. Murphy smiled faintly. A real smile. Then he placed the crown carefully in his pocket. I'm coming. The warehouse was dark. Rain poured outside. Just like the night Murphy lost everything. But this time was different. This time he knew who the enemy was. The vehicles stopped outside. Murphy looked through the window. Everyone stays back until my signal. The guards were shocked. Sir, it's dangerous. Murphy looked at them. So is every important thing. Then he opened the door. Inside the warehouse, Marco waited. When Murphy entered, he smiled. I knew you would come yourself. Murphy looked around. Allie and Lily were nearby. Safe, but scared. The moment Lily saw him, her eyes widened. Mr. Murphy! She tried to run toward him, but Marco stopped her. Stay there. Murphy's expression changed instantly. Not fear, not anger. Something much darker. Move away from her. Marco laughed. There he is. The man who controls an entire city. The man who made thousands fear him. And now?
He looked at Lily. You're afraid because of one child. Murphy looked directly at him. No. Marco frowned. No? Murphy shook his head. I'm afraid of what I will do if you hurt her. The room became silent, because that was the truth. Marco stepped closer. You still don't understand. I won. You've lost everything. Murphy looked at him. Did I? Marco smiled. You lost your position. No. You lost your ability. No. You lost your future. Murphy looked toward Lily, then Allie, and slowly shook his head. You're wrong. Marco frowned. About what? Murphy's voice was quiet. For the first time in my life, I have something that matters. Marco became angry because he hated that answer. He wanted Murphy broken. He wanted him desperate. He wanted him to beg. But Murphy was not begging. He was standing there with a calm expression. The same expression he had before making impossible decisions. Marco realized something too late. The wheelchair had never been Murphy's weakness. It had forced him to become smarter, more patient, more careful. Suddenly the lights inside the warehouse turned on. Marco turned, confused. Then he heard footsteps. Not from Murphy. From outside. His own people. The ones he trusted. They were being surrounded. Marco's face changed. "What did you do?" Murphy looked at him. "I waited." A pause. "While you were celebrating victory, I was collecting evidence." Marco stared at him. "You knew?" "For days." "And you did nothing?" Murphy looked at him. "I wanted to know why." Silence. "And now I know." The police were not involved. This was not that kind of world. But every person who supported Marco had already turned against him. The financial records, the communication evidence, the betrayal. Everything was exposed. Marco had spent years planning to replace Murphy. But he forgot one thing. A king does not lose his throne because someone wants it. Marco suddenly moved toward Lily. Allie screamed. Murphy's eyes changed. "Marco." The single word stopped him, because the voice was different. Not the voice of a wounded man. Not the voice of someone afraid. The voice of the man who once controlled the city. Marco froze. "You really made one mistake," Murphy said. "You thought love made me weak." A pause. "It didn't. It gave me a reason to win." Minutes later, Marco was defeated. The man who spent years planning Murphy's downfall finally lost everything. His power, his allies, his future. All because he misunderstood the one thing Murphy gained after losing everything. Humanity. When everything was over, Lily ran toward Murphy. "Mr. Murphy." He opened his arms. She hugged him tightly. "You came." Murphy closed his eyes. "Yes. I promised." Lily smiled. "I knew you would." Outside, the rain continued falling. But this time, Murphy did not feel cold, because he finally understood. The strongest person was not the one who never fell. The strongest person was the one who found a reason to stand again, even when standing was impossible. Murphy Moretti used to believe that winning meant standing above everyone else. It meant having more money, more power, more quest. Murphy still had difficult days. His recovery was not a miracle story. His legs did not suddenly heal. He still needed assistance. He still had to attend therapy. He still had moments when frustration overwhelmed him. But the difference was, he no longer faced those moments alone. Before Lily and Allie entered his life, Murphy hated needing help. He hated depending on others. He hated showing any sign of vulnerability.
But now, when the therapist helped him move, he did not feel ashamed. Because every afternoon, Lily sat nearby and cheered. "Mr. Murphy, you can do it!" And somehow, those simple words gave him more strength than any doctor's speech. One afternoon, Murphy was practicing his rehabilitation exercises. The therapist watched carefully. Again, Murphy frowned. "I already did it 20 times. "And you need to do it 20 more, Murphy sighed. Before, he would have been irritated. Before, he would have dismissed the therapist. But then, he heard a small voice. Again, Murphy looked over. Lily was sitting in a chair, holding her stuffed rabbit. She looked serious. "You heard the doctor?" Murphy raised an eyebrow. "The doctor?" Lily nodded. "Yes. You are not a doctor." She thought for a moment. Then she answered,
I'm a lily doctor. For a second, Murphy tried to stay serious. He failed. A small smile appeared on his face. The therapist laughed. I think she's the strictest doctor here. Murphy looked at Liva. Yes. A pause. She is. Allie watched from the doorway. She had seen Murphy change more than anyone. When she first met him, he was a man who had stopped living. His body was alive, but his heart was closed. He believed people only stayed when they needed something. He believed love always came with a condition. He believed everyone eventually left. But Lily never asked him for anything. She never cared about his money. She never cared about his reputation. She never cared about the rumors. She only cared that he was lonely. And somehow, that simple kindness had broken through years of walls. One evening, Murphy and Allie sat together in the garden. The sunset covered the sky. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was peaceful, something Murphy rarely experienced before. Finally, Allie said, "You're different." Murphy looked at her. Is that a good thing? She smiled. Yes. A pause. When I first came here, everyone told me you were dangerous. Murphy looked away. They weren't wrong. Allie shook her head. No. She looked at him. They were incomplete. Murphy became quiet. Because that was exactly what Lily had done. She had not erased his past. She had simply shown that there was more to him than his past. I was not a good man before. Allie did not argue. She did not say empty words. She simply answered, maybe. Murphy looked surprised. Most people would immediately tell him he was wrong. But Allie continued. But people are not only who they were. She looked toward the house. They are also who they choose to become. That night, Murphy sat in his office. The same office where Lily had first entered. The same place where she gave him a broken cookie. He opened the drawer. Inside were all the things he had kept. Her drawings, the paper crown, the small bracelet, a dried flower, things that had almost no value to anyone else. But to Murphy, they were priceless, because they represented the moment his life changed, the moment he realized he was not truly empty. A few months later, something happened that shocked the entire city. Murphy Moretti appeared at a public event. For 2 years, he avoided attention. He avoided cameras. He avoided public appearances. But this time, he came. Not as a feared mafia leader. Not as a symbol of power. But as a man who wanted to announce a new beginning. The reporters immediately surrounded him. Mr. Moretti, are you returning to full control of the organization? Are you stronger after the betrayal? Will you seek revenge against Marco Bellini? Murphy listened quietly. Then he answered, revenge is not what saved me. The reporters became silent. Murphy continued, power did not save me. Money did not save me.
Fear did not save me. He looked toward the crowd. The people who stayed did. The statement shocked everyone, because nobody expected those words from Murphy Moretti. The man who once believed emotions were dangerous had openly admitted that love was his strength. After that day, people began seeing him differently. Some still feared him. Some still respected him. But many finally understood something. The man they called a monster had never been without feelings.
He had simply been hurt too many times. Years later, people would still talk about Murphy Moretti. They would talk about his empire, his enemies, his victories. But the people closest to him remembered something else. They remembered a little girl with a broken cookie. They remembered a child who walked into the office of the most dangerous man in Chicago and said, "You look lonely." They remembered the moment a man who had everything finally discovered what he truly needed. One evening, Lily, now older, walked into Murphy's office. She placed something on his desk, a drawing. Murphy smiled. "Another picture?" She nodded. "Yes." He looked at it. This time, it was different. The picture showed a house, a garden, a woman, a girl, and a man standing beside them. Murphy looked closely. "You drew me standing?" Lily smiled. "Yes, but I can't stand." She tilted her head. "Not with your legs." Murphy looked at her. "Then how?" Lily pointed at his heart. "Here." For a moment, Murphy said nothing. Then he smiled. Because she was right. The world once knew Murphy Moretti as a man who could destroy anyone. A man who controlled everything. A man who never needed anyone. But the truth was different. The strongest thing Murphy Moretti ever did was allow himself to be loved. Because anyone can build an empire. Anyone can collect wealth. Anyone can make people fear them. But it takes real courage to open your heart after it has been broken. And that was the real story of Murphy Moretti. The Mafia boss who lost his ability to walk. The man who was abandoned when he became weak. The king who fell from the top. But also, the man who found a family when he thought he had nothing left. Because in the end, Murphy Moretti was not saved by power. He was saved by a little girl who was never afraid of him. And sometimes, the smallest person in the room can become the reason someone finally learns how to stand again. Dear friends, Murphy Moretti once believed that power was the only thing that could protect him. But after losing his ability to walk, his empire, and the people he trusted, he discovered something he never expected. A little girl, who knew nothing about his past or his reputation, saw the lonely man hidden behind the feared mafia boss. Her kindness reminded Murphy that even the strongest hearts can break, and even broken hearts can heal. Sometimes, the person who changes our life forever is not someone powerful. Sometimes, they are simply someone who chooses to stay. So we leave you with one final question today. Has anyone ever entered your life unexpectedly and changed it in a way you never imagined? Share your thoughts and stories with us in the comments below. If Murphy and the little girl's journey touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. May you always find someone who sees your true heart, not just the face you show the world. Take care of yourselves and each other. We'll meet again in the next story. Goodbye for now.